Welcome to a webinar on the generationOn website. So this website is for educators and students to use in order to become familiar with and incorporate resources for service learning. So generationOn is a not-for-profit national website. You will never be solicited by becoming a registered user on the site. And students anyone ages 13 and up can create an account on this site and use these resources. So students can actually get on this site and utilize the free resources as well. And they can even log their service. So this site then becomes a valuable resource for students in order to keep their service that they do, whether it's with you in the school or maybe in a community organization like Scouting or their youth group. All of this can be warehoused in one place. And that's really good for future reference as they begin to fill out applications for jobs, scholarships, and college applications. So this website has multiple uses and multiple audiences. There's also information where families can get on this website and use the resources together to do service as a family. But today we're going to concentrate on what it is that you as an educator will want to use in the classroom. So once you've created an account on generationOn, you will have a dashboard. That dashboard is going to show anything that you log in there in terms of your service, anything that you've marked so that you can find it more easily. It's all going to be located there. So once you create an account, that dashboard is available by this dashboard button. Before that time, you literally will click the words join now, and at that point you can fill out the very brief 2-minute or less application in order to be part of the website. Then it's fairly self-explanatory, but everything on this website is navigated from the menu button up here in the corner, and that's where we're going to start. So the first place I would suggest you go to is where it says for classrooms and schools. When you go to that area on the website, you're going to see there is a directory. Here you can view all schools that have registered accounts on generationOn. You can register your school. A word of caution here. You will want to check to be sure your school is not registered before you register yourself. Having multiple accounts for one school can get very confusing. So you might check to be sure your school is not on there, and you might check how your school might be listed multiple ways, because if you try to register your school in a slightly different way than someone else has already registered it, you may end up with 2 accounts anyway. So just carefully check that before you register your school. But it is nice to be registered, because then everyone in your school can link to your school account so that you can share your ideas and your service learning projects with one another. Perhaps the most important area is this area here called resources for educators. So by going to these resources, you're going to find the tools that you need in order to incorporate service learning into your classroom. If you click on that blue button, Find Resources, you're going to go to this page. And the resources that are listed here, first of all, there is an area called Why Service Learning. And in this, you're going to find some really good information about the benefits of service learning, the benefits for students, the benefits for the school, the benefits for the community at large. These are really good resources that you can share with parents. Send them home before you start a service learning project so that they understand that what their child is excited about doing in your classroom has real bona fide benefits for the student. Also, it's great just to share with a principal, an administrator, maybe even with other educators about why service learning is such an effective practice for students, how it benefits your community at large, and also your school. Then, because the 2 websites that are recommended that you use for service learning are not connected to one another, but they're sister organizations, and the websites do talk to one another. There are actually links here directly to the sister website, Learning to Give, where there are going to be lesson plans available for incorporation with your service learning project. So if you clicked on that link, it would redirect you to Learning to Give, the sister website. And just for your information, there is a separate tutorial for that website located under the training videos as well. So refer to that for additional information on Learning to Give. Then at the very bottom, this is where you're going to get some useful tools as an educator to incorporate into service learning. iParde is the acronym that we use to define the process that students will use in the implementation of service learning into the curriculum. The I stands for investigation, the P stands for planning, as in planning the actual form of service. A is for the action students will take, any one of those 4 kinds of service learning: direct service, indirect service, advocacy, or research. The R is for reflection, which is where students have a chance to think about and evaluate what they are doing throughout the process and make corrections or replicate what is good during the process. The D is for demonstrate, because again, people need to know what your students are doing, these really good things that they're going to do. It's important that we let the community know about the good things that are being done in the classroom and how students are actively and civically engaged in their community. And then E is the final evaluation, that I suggest all educators go through that process and evaluate the project. But it's good for the students to do a final evaluation as well, so that again, they can take pride in the difference that they've made. They can look at ways that maybe they would do the project differently in the future, and then also become an expert on the benefits of service learning for their peers, and take those ideas into their school career, so that they can spread the joy of service learning to others. So if you click on the words Get iParde Resources, you're going to see these things. For each of those 6 steps, you will see some live links to created materials that you can use. You can actually print them off and use them, but these are pre-made tools for you to use in each of these 6 areas, so that you don't have to create the materials necessary to have a record of what students have done, and to keep them on the pathway of utilizing those 6 steps that then make this service learning project also a STEM project, because these 6 steps are a mirror image of the engineering design process, which we use in STEM curriculum. So simply by utilizing the 6 iParde steps, maybe your language arts teacher, who never thought that he or she was a STEM teacher, can actually be utilizing STEM, reinforcing it, and teaching that process through maybe a content area that students don't think of as being STEM, and actually then making that a STEM area because of the process of inquiry and discovery that will be used in the classroom. Also, I like to call these your roadmap for students to keep them on task, and also a great way to accrue documentation for the future about how the service learning project was implemented and carried out. Particularly thinking about the graduation pathways here in Indiana, when you look at the criteria that the state of Indiana has set for service learning to be applicable for Box 2 in the process, these types of documentation are really good to maybe put in a portfolio, because they demonstrate how Box 2 criteria have been accomplished. So there's something for each one of the different letters in the iParde process right here under the iParde resources page. All right, moving on back to our menu button at the top. The next place I suggest you go is down here where it says projects and causes. I've opened that up already. And here's what I really like about projects and causes. This is a very engaging page. This is where you're going to want to take your students. If students are under the age of 13, I suggest that you project this in your classroom and let them look at it with you, because they've made this very user-friendly. I think it's very engaging for students as they look at it, but it's going to list areas where service learning makes sense. And your students are going to be able to read about each one of these areas and find an area where perhaps they might feel a passion to serve. Below each one of the areas, there will be the number of projects that will be included in that area, and also any other resources that are also on the site that apply to that issue area. So just looking through, these are the different areas where service makes sense. And again, students can look through them and find things that they're passionate about, read those synopses, and then perhaps go in and investigate what an area looks like. So I've opened up one of my favorite areas because it particularly appeals to students, and that is animal welfare. When you open up one of those areas, you're going to see that they all look something like this. Again, there's a description of what this area of service looks like. You're going to be able to filter the audience. So if you're just dealing with students under 12, you can select kids. If you are dealing with teenagers, you can select teens. And then again, families can come on here and find family projects that they can do together. There's also a way to look at budget. If budget is an issue, you can filter into projects that really have no financial outlay for you as well. Below that then are going to be the names of the different projects that are underneath each one of these different areas where service makes sense. And for each of the titles below that is a synopsis of the actual project itself. And you'll see they're all listed here for you. Once students read about them on this page, then they're able to go in and say, hey, let's look at this one. So let's open this project here called Doggy Bags. And again, at the top of each project, there's going to be a statistic that will help you encourage students to become involved, because now it's going to give meaning to the service project. For instance, this one says that between 5 and 7 million animals enter shelters each year. That's a staggering, and that's yearly. That's a staggering statistic. And there's always a picture over here that's going to give your students additional motivation. But here we have a dog that is in a kennel in some sort of a shelter. And below that then is the actual project. So you're going to find a list of the materials that you need and then the steps. And here's one of the reasons why I really like these pages. If you look at the steps, look at step number 1 here. Call a local animal shelter and ask if they would be willing to accept your treats. In this day and age where we must often insist that anything that we consume in the classroom has to be prepackaged and wrapped, you're going to find probably the same is true at many shelters. And what you don't really want is for your students to bake all these dog treats. Then they call the shelter and the shelter says, oh, sorry, must be pre-boxed, pre-wrapped. We cannot accept homemade treats for our animals. So by going through the steps in the manner that they're listed here, that's going to forego that oops in their project. However, your students could bake all these treats and then they get down here and they read step 1. And again, I'm going to contend that that's not really a bad thing, because at that point, this is where a big learning process can come into play. You can have a discussion with your students. All right, so we have 250 dog bones and we can't donate them to the local shelter. We don't have to despair. We didn't make such a goof that we can't still have a project that's going to benefit animals. So let's brainstorm about how we can still be successful in our endeavors to help animals in shelters. And through that discussion, you might decide you're going to sell your pre-made treats, perhaps in the cafeteria, perhaps to the community at large. You're going to have an additional drive where you collect money in a jar called Pennies for Puppies. So instead of throwing your your change after you go through the lunch line on the floor of the cafeteria, you drop it in the Pennies for Puppies jar instead. And you take those funds that you've raised and you purchase those treats. Or maybe the shelter tells you, we don't really need treats, we need dog beds, and we need a specific kind. So now you take that money and you purchase what the shelter says they could really use in order to make the most impact on those animals that find themselves in shelters awaiting adoption. So once you've gone through the steps of your project, you're going to see that also included on each one of these projects will be questions for reflection. So you don't even have to go back to those iParty resources to find ways to reflect. They're going to have reflection questions incorporated right here on the page. And then they're going to link you to other resources that I'm going to be showing you today that you can utilize to make your project more comprehensive. So everything is included on a project profile page on the generationOn website. All right, so let's go back to the navigation button up here, the menu button, and now let's look at the area called resources. So I've opened that for you, and on the resources page, you're going to find links to books. These are K through 12 books that you can be reading with students to incorporate literature with your service learning project. So again, they're going to be listed by issue area or service area. And this will help you link curriculum to your project. But also for every one of those areas where students can serve, you can find fact sheets. And I love fact sheets. I love these because they're very interesting to students. They get them thinking in depth about the need for service. And it also explains some pretty key ideas that maybe students had never really thought of or hadn't discovered prior to being involved in this service learning project with you. So this is a hunger fact sheet. Think of that canned food drive in your school where students have become a little apathetic and they're only bringing in corn and green beans because it's the cheapest item on the shelf, and we're trying to collect 14,000 cans. So quantity is more important than quality. Well, if you're really doing a bona fide service learning project, we need to talk about what it is that people need to have good nutrition, why we have people that are hungry, and what that looks like. Are hungry people in other countries and not in the United States? What does it mean for people in our own community? What does that look like? So going to a fact sheet is going to help you facilitate that conversation. So the first thing you're going to find are these facts. Did you know? And they start with around the world. 795 million people are affected by hunger every year. But the fourth item down is perhaps the most impactful in my opinion. And I think this is where we begin to get students connected in a meaningful way to service learning, where it says more than 1 in 5 kids in the United States don't know where their next meal is coming from. Now this becomes an understandable and visual representation of the problem here and now in our community, not some far off place that doesn't seem like it's going to affect students in the future. So you're going to find these very germane facts here that you can share with students and get the discussion going, creating that passion to serve. Because when students understand the problem and they develop empathy about the problem, they're going to be much more engaged in the service. And now the service becomes meaningful service. This is where the learning piece comes in, understanding the problem and understanding that I have a part to play in making a difference. But there's more to hunger than just the fact that we're going to collect cans for people. But why do we want people to get enough food? And so the why of the situation is going to be presented for students, that, you know, if we don't give people a balanced diet, we're going to have health problems. If children don't get good nutrition in the first 3 years of their lives, it can actually affect their brain development, which then affects their learning. And if a child is hungry in school, 1 in 5 who doesn't know where the next meal is coming from, they cannot concentrate, which makes learning harder. You can have a great discussion about that, and even perhaps bring that up when you're talking about proper nutrition prior to standardized testing. But I think if you want to do a really deep dive, then the information below is really good. What are some of the reasons why people go hungry? I don't think that people understand what a food desert is. And so there's an area here where you can begin to talk about a food desert, where we do have areas where there's not access to grocery stores. Downtown Indianapolis, for example, there's very little access right there for people to go grocery shopping. What if you live in a very rural area and the grocery store is far away and transportation is an issue? Those are food deserts, and I think that's a foreign term to students, but it's a real term for people who are going hungry. And then there are suggestions for additional projects. So how can you help? So there's a list here of additional projects that students can become engaged in order to make a difference in this area of service. So a fact sheet, really great for stimulating conversation, giving kids the desire to serve, creating their passion for service, and making them fully aware of the impact service can have and why service in this area is necessary. All right, so that was resources, fact sheets. Going back again then to resources, you can actually filter resources. You'll see a button here, add a filter. There's all kinds of filters you can add. If you just want to see fact sheets, you can filter that way. If you just want to see links to reading, you can see it that way. If you just want to see a cause, you can filter that way. But one that I think is really important is to click on the PDF download. That's going to take you to an important resource that I think you'll find very valuable. That resource, when you use the PDF download and you click here, is called a Do Your Own Thing guide. So I have that resource up. It is a PDF download. Why do I like this resource? This is something you can print out for students. It is not something that they can use a one-on-one device to write right on because this is a national website and we're talking about minor children. We don't want them putting personal information into a computer that's discoverable by people who may not have the most honest motive for accessing a child's information. So this is something I would print out and maybe give to your kids as a group so that they will collaborate and communicate throughout the process, or you can give it to each individual. This is also a great guide that could be saved in a portfolio for documentation for Box 2 or just documentation of service. There are two of these guides. This is the teens guide, which generally we think of as 13 and up. There is also a similar guide for kids, which would be 12 and under. It's more an filtering by perhaps Lexile and also the amount of information students can put in, but there's no reason why you couldn't put out a teen guide for kids whose reading level is higher. Maybe they need a more comprehensive way to track their service learning. You can use the teens guide really for any grade level. Look at that kids guide when you're really dealing with your elementary students and looking for a simplified way that they can document their service. So what does the Do Your Own Thing guide look like? I really like this because it's totally comprehensive. It takes all those I-PARTE steps into consideration. It's going to start by asking those probing questions that we want students to be thinking about in order to develop their idea for service. And then it begins talking to them about what do you need in order to do this? So they're going to give them a list of things that they might need to stay efficient and remain on task. And then they're going to, again, to ask them to begin to discover areas where they might be passionate to serve through some probing questions. There's always a graphic organizer included so that they can begin to brainstorm how they want to go about service and what that looks like. And then if they're still at a loss for an example. Below, they're going to give them ideas again of areas where they can actually serve, and some questions for them to be asking and answering about their service learning project. Then again, digging deeper. Why is it important? What facts and research support your idea? All of those things are going to be on here. Where can you serve? Helping kids begin to discover where in the community this service might be most valuable. What you can do to help and who you might be helping, looking at those organizations that, again, they can connect with. How to be professional, teaching those employability skills with students. If you're going to be dealing with the public, how do we do that in a professional manner? Putting the project all together, creating it, what that looks like, creating a to-do list, putting your project ideas together, and then even a little chart for a rudimentary budget, so that if there are costs associated with the project, those can be documented and tracked here. This at least gives them a starting point so they can be thinking about cost. You don't want students engaged in a project that's going to be cost prohibitive, so they can begin to think about that in this area of the Do Your Own Thing guide. So then below, and this is an important device you can use, if you have students that need to see the end in order to get to the beginning. I had a lot of students that needed an example of something finished in order to get even started. On this Do Your Own Thing guide, there is a completed module or unit right here to show them what that might look like, how they can plan, and maybe what their completed guide would look like once it's finished. So you even have an example below that you can share with them if they need that in order to accomplish their projects. So this is the generationOn website. Again, it is a free website. All of these resources are at your disposal and your students. Remember that students under the age of 13 can create an account on here and track their personal service as well. You will find that it's very valuable and that there are some really great resources you can use to stimulate the conversation and the passion your students are going to have in order to be able to serve others through service learning. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy using these resources to inspire our youth to have a heart for others and to develop empathy within our children. Thank you so much.